Theoderic the Great never fathered a son. In a highly patriarchal world, this left him without an heir to pass his kingdom to. He did, however, father 3 daughters, so he had options. 2 of his daughters, Ostrogotho and Theodahad, were likely the result of Theodoric's relationship with a concubine. They were both married off to other European kings to help cement political alliances. But Theodoric's 3rd daughter was the product of his marriage to Amalasuntha, the sister of the Frankish king Clovis. Theodoric chose this daughter, Amalasuntha, to help carry on his rule. In 515, Amalasuntha was given in marriage to Eutharic, a Gothic noble from Spain. Eutharic's family had been prominent in the Visigothic court, but after Theodoric selected him for his daughter, the Roman statesman Cassiodorus found a link between Eutharic's family and Theodoric's Amal dynasty. This connection was possibly fabricated to add legitimacy to Eutharic, but he was joining the Amal dynasty anyway through his marriage to Theodoric's daughter. Either way, the new son-in-law would be primed to take over the kingdom when Theodoric passed on. The Eastern Roman Emperor at the time, Justin, granted Eutharic Roman citizenship and the title Son at Arms, recognizing his claim as the heir to Theodoric. In 519, Eutharic was appointed to the consulship in Rome. The next step was the throne in Ravenna when Theodoric's time was up. But unfortunately, that never happened. Eutharic died in 522 or possibly 523. Theodoric was, again, left without an heir. He was now 70 years old. He had no son. The man he had been grooming to replace him was gone. So he now pinned all of his hopes on his 7-year-old grandson, Athalaric. The Ostrogothic court, though, wasn't completely sold on handing the reins to the boy. Many nobles pushed for others to be named the successor, including Theodahad, Theodoric's nephew. Remember that name, it's going to come up again later. Still, Theodoric chose Athalaric and stuck with the plan. His grandson would take over, regardless of what the other elites had to say about it. Theodoric would just have to live long enough for the boy to come of age. But that would not happen. Theodoric died in 526, leaving his grandson, now all of 10 years old, in charge of the kingdom. With Athalaric too young to rule, his mother, Amalasuntha, would serve as his regent. And almost immediately, the Gothic nobles began lobbying for control over Athalaric. His mother insisted that the boy be given a classical Roman education, just as Theodoric had provided for his children. But many nobles in the royal court disagreed, claiming that the boy needed to learn Gothic values and Gothic traditions. With his father and grandfather dead, and unable to model for him, they feared that a Roman education would leave Athalaric more Roman than Gothic. Or at least, that is what they said. The whole dispute is likely window dressing. These nobles probably didn't object to Athalaric's Roman education because they wanted to preserve his Gothic identity. They just wanted the boy closer to them because it was better for their own ambitions and their own power within the kingdom. The core issue wasn't whether Ostrogothic Italy would be a more Roman state or a more Gothic state. It was who would have the ear of the king. Meanwhile, the Eastern Romans saw the trouble in the Ostrogothic court as an opportunity to strengthen their hand. A letter written in Athalaric's name to Emperor Justin in Constantinople in 526 laments that while Eutharic had been given the title Son at Arms, that title had not yet been granted to the new heir, who, by this point, was the new king. There was, of course, a reason that Constantinople did not immediately recognize the heir with this title. Throughout their history, the Eastern Romans were very, very good at exploiting political events in neighboring states to their advantage. This is very likely what they were doing here. If Justin recognized Athalaric, he would be elevating the boy to the level of Theodoric. But the Eastern Romans knew that they had an opportunity to weaken the ties between Ostrogothic Italy and its neighbors in Western Europe, particularly Visigothic Spain. The Visigoths were asserting their own independence in the wake of Theodoric's death, and the Eastern Romans weren't about to throw the Ostrogoths a lifeline by giving full support to a new king. They were more than happy to let the two Gothic states drift a little further apart while the Ostrogoths twisted in the wind. Amalasuntha could see that she needed to take matters into her own hands. She saw to it that her three leading political rivals were given senior commands outside of Ravenna. Once they were out of the capital, they were murdered on her orders. Later on, Amalasuntha's cousin, Theodahad, ran into some trouble in Tuscany where local citizens were complaining that he had illegally seized their property. Amalasuntha ruled that Theodahad had acted inappropriately, and he was forced to return estates to previous owners. He was humiliated by the ordeal and hindered financially. Theodahad began to make overtures to Constantinople, thinking of relocating to greener pastures. All of this bought Amalasuntha some time, but she knew she wasn't out of the woods just yet. She even went so far as to have a ship loaded with treasure and sent to port across the Adriatic, so that if the situation took a turn, she could flee the kingdom immediately and look for refuge in Constantinople. She maintained a strong relationship with the Eastern Romans, despite their initial refusal to recognize Athalaric in the way that they had recognized Eutharic. In 527, Justinian took the throne. His friendship with Amalasuntha was a reason that the Ostrogothic queen agreed to let Belisarius port in Sicily on his way to North Africa for his campaign against the Vandals. Amalasuntha may have had her enemies in the Ostrogothic court, but it seemed like she had friends in just the right places. She held the kingdom together for 8 years, while Athalaric reached adulthood. As Athalaric aged, however, his health deteriorated. Procopius says that his poor health was at least partially the result of excessive alcohol use. He called it a wasting disease. By the summer of 534, Amalasuntha may have sensed that Athalaric was not long for the world. A diplomatic delegation from Constantinople, led by a diplomat named Alexander, arrived in Ravenna that summer. Alexander requested that a former Vandal port in western Sicily be surrendered to the Eastern Romans, as they had been the ones who crushed the Vandal kingdom. And he asked that Amalasuntha turn over slaves that had fled Constantinople and sought refuge in Italy. Amalasuntha publicly turned these requests down, showing her strength to the Ostrogothic court. However, she also composed a secret message to be delivered to Justinian. Amalasuntha, fearing that she would lose everything upon Athalaric's death, offered to turn over her entire kingdom to Justinian if he would guarantee her safety. Justinian was overjoyed when his ambassadors returned with Amalasuntha's offer. He immediately sent Peter the Patrician back to Ravenna to work out the best deal that he could get. Peter was an intelligent and gifted ambassador, and Justinian trusted him to handle this delicate situation correctly. His official mission was to revisit the requests made by Alexander, but his real mission was to dig deeper into the possibility of taking Italy from Amalasuntha. But on his way to Italy, Peter met with Ostrogothic ambassadors headed from Ravenna to Constantinople. They had news that would alter everything. On October 2nd, 534, Athalaric had died. His death would have threatened Amalasuntha's position, and the nobles would have been jockeying for power once again. But there was a second bit of news from the ambassadors that would have been just as shocking as the first. Amalasuntha had attempted to secure her position by elevating her cousin, Theodahad, to be her co-ruler. This must have shocked Peter, but Amalasuntha needed to do something to save her own skin. Peter immediately sent word back to Justinian, asking for new orders on how to proceed. This would delay his mission to Ravenna. Meanwhile, in Italy, Amalasuntha and Theodahad announced their bond. Note that the cousins were not married. This was a political partnership. The pair issued letters to Justinian and to the Roman Senate announcing their affiliation, and Amalasuntha referred to Theodahad as her brother, while Theodahad called Amalasuntha not only his sister, but his Precellentissima Domina, which literally means his excellent lady. But domina means lady, as in the female version of lord. It is not lady meaning a polite or proper woman. It's much more than that. Theodahad was stating his subservience to Amalasuntha. The message here is clear. While the two would work together, Amalasuntha was top dog. Justinian's orders for Peter were to continue his trip to Italy and express his full support for Amalasuntha, while testing the waters on the offer to turn over the kingdom to the Eastern Romans. But when Peter finally arrived in Ravenna in early spring 535, he learned that the tables had turned once again. Amalasuntha, daughter of Theodoric the Great, ally of Emperor Justinian, the Queen of the Ostrogoths, had been murdered. She had been sent to Lake Bolsena, an area friendly to Theodahad, and had been imprisoned there. She was then killed in her bath by partisans of the men she had assassinated in 526. She was only 40 years old. Theodahad was now the sole ruler of the kingdom. Peter hurried the news home to Justinian and made the new king know just how much of a mistake this was. Justinian had invaded North Africa in 533 because a king friendly to him had been overthrown. He would surely consider the same action here. Theodahad, fearing retribution, stressed that he had not been responsible for the assassination. That had been carried out solely by Amalasuntha's rivals. Peter spent the next few months hurrying between Constantinople and Ravenna with messages for Justinian and Theodahad. Justinian hoped he could still get Theodahad to turn over the kingdom without the need for war. But he prepared for alternatives. In the summer of 535, Belisarius set sail from Constantinople with about 7,000 to 8,000 men. He was being sent to North Africa to reinforce the newly acquired territories. He would stop over in Sicily on the way, just as he had in 533. This time, he had secret orders from Justinian to see just how prepared the Ostrogoths were for an onslaught.